Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like all the best bookshops, this podcast is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. So tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and host of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This is episode number 211. For more information about this or any of our episodes, go to my website, staceyhoran.com. If you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review, like us on social media, and share us with your friends, family, and fellow readers. In today's episode of The Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm chatting with author Lane Igoudin about his new memoir, A Family Maybe, Two Dads, Two Babies, and the Court Cases That Brought Us Together. In this book, Lane details the challenges, legal, political, and personal, that he and his partner Jonathan faced in the early 2000s while trying to adopt their two foster children through the Los Angeles County child welfare system. The process took 3 years and was fraught with much stress, numerous court delays, and plenty of heartache. Along that journey, Lane amassed a vast collection of paperwork and court orders, hundreds of emails, and a diary detailing his family's everyday experiences and struggles. 4 years passed before Lane was able to open the boxes and look at the documents he'd collected, and it took him 8 years to produce a draft of the story. Writing it was a painful process, but a rewarding one. A Family Maybe is a story about building a family and discovering what it means to be a father. But ultimately, it is a story about love. In this episode, I'll chat with Lane about his writing journey, how he and Jonathan's relationship and their racial and ethnic backgrounds affected the adoption process, and the support they received from unexpected places, as well as a few other things coming up. Lane Igoudin, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
I'm glad to be here.
I thought what we could do today is start by talking about your new memoir, A Family Maybe. If you don't mind, let's start by you telling us a little bit about this book. I want to talk about the inspiration for it in a moment, but maybe give us a preview of what the book is about.
Sure. I decided to write this book to share with the others, and that could be prospective adoptive parents or just any parent, because it's a family building story, to describe the very unusual story, the unusual journey that my husband Jonathan and I took through the foster adoption process. We adopted two children from the Los Angeles County foster care system. And the further in we got, the more I realized that this is a story that needs to be told. And so that was my inspiration for writing the book.
Let's kind of walk through the process, because
Sure.
In reading the book, it was not a quick process. It was long and drawn out, and what struck me as painful at times. So maybe start us off. How did you even begin this foster adoption journey?
Sure. And the process took us about 3 years, from the beginning to the end. But I wanted to write about it, and I kept collecting all the paperwork and the court orders, and I had dozens and if not hundreds of emails. And I also kept a very detailed diary throughout the process. And I thought, okay, well, once we're done, I'll sit down and write about it and share the story. And what happened is once we were done, I couldn't do it. It was too painful. I was too close to it. And I just kept my records in in the boxes. I actually had a couple of boxes in the garage where I threw everything in, and I couldn't open the boxes for almost 4 years. And I teach, I teach English and linguistics at a college, and so I get my summers off, and during the summers I'd be with the kids, and basically I think 4 years later, into 2012, I decided to reopen to just to see what's in the boxes, and I decided to start putting some things together. And it took me about 8 years, 8 years to produce the first draft and edit it. And so then I started looking for a publisher to take it on.
So going back and creating that draft, I imagine it must have been an incredibly difficult process, one that took you 8 years to finish. How much of that was starting, stopping, putting it away, or was it a case of writing it and just writing it over and over and over again?
What I did is I tried to begin from the beginning, whenever that beginning is, it could be when Jonathan and I met, which is over 26 years ago, actually, or when we entered the process. And so I started drafting that. And then so it was sort of like very detailed, very straightforward. But then I realized that, it's really not as a story, it really needs to start with a moment which really captures the essence of what we're going through. And so if you read the book now, the opening chapter is when we are anxiously waiting for the social worker to bring a baby to our house. And it kind of explains how we ended up in that situation, and some of the steps that led up to that, and why we're so anxious about that. And then basically when she brings the baby, and she parks her van by the house, but by the curbside, and I call the chapter curbside delivery. And we run out to get the baby, bring her inside. Then, I stay with the baby, and my husband gets up and he is off to a daycare to pick up her sister. So then the reader realizes that this is not the beginning of the process. We're somewhere in, what's really like about a third of the way in, and we already have an older sister, and now we have a baby, and what's going on here, So that's the starting point, and from that point, I'm moving forward, but I'm also moving backward to build up some of the backstory and let the readers know exactly how we ended up in it. And this question, how did we end here, will come up over and over and over again throughout the book. So that was the structure. At its longest, the book was about double the size of what it is now. And the more I was revising it, the more I was editing, I realized that I really wanted to tell the story and kind of leave out, because I did a lot of research, because a lot of things were really strange and kind of, I couldn't understand, why, why they're happening the way they do. Are they, is this how things should be? Why do we suppose that certain things are are the only way to do things? So I kept some of this research, but I actually cut most of it, and also cut most of my commentary, because I think the story itself tells you how things are and who the people are that are in them, and all kinds of prejudices and attitudes, and I would say ideologies that go into the child welfare process.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's talk about some of those points. I want to go back to that comment you made where you said that at several different places in the book, at several different points on that journey, the question was asked, how did we end up here? And that's not a question for listeners. That wasn't necessarily a question of, why did we decide to adopt, but how did we end up in this crazy predicament while just trying to do a wonderful thing by adopting these children? So can you walk us through why that question kept coming up?
Well, we entered the process. We were a, professional couple. We both had, 9 to 5 jobs, and we were planning to have children. I always saw myself as a father in my future. And then, and when I shared this dream with my with my partner at the time, with Jonathan. I'm saying partner at the time because we couldn't get married. We weren't husbands yet, and so that will all come later. So, but in any case, I shared that with Jonathan, and he wasn't on board right away, by the way, and that's in the book. I'm not trying to in any way smooth that out. But he came around. He came around, and so we decided to enter the process. And so because we had multiple routes available to us at the time, we could have gone the surrogacy route. We could have done a private adoption, which is different from public adoption, which we ended up doing, or we could have even gone international. There were opportunities at the time to adopt a child from a handful of countries. So all of that was available to us, but we decided to go exactly into the public adoption because we're guided by this vision of of opening our home to a child or a couple of children from this area, from this neighborhood. Like, why should we travel to let's say Central America where we got children who need a home maybe just a few blocks away from where we live. That was the belief that brought us into it. So we were altruistic. We really wanted to do the best we could, and we were very naive about the process and about everything that goes into it.
Yeah, yeah, it sounds like you guys were not prepared for what was about to hit you. That and it seemed like in
Yeah.
some instances the rules appeared to keep changing.
The rules are complicated. The rules are invisible in many ways. There's one thing that's on paper and another thing what you learn from how things really are. And we were not prepared for what hit us, but we got smarter as we went further into the process. We learned more about the process and we began to participate, even though we were completely powerless in it. And you read the book, you know that not only we were not part of we're not one of the parties to the case, was only the birth parents and the county, really. When we tried to become part of the case by applying for the de facto parent status, we went and we hired a lawyer and all that. Our motion was dismissed and we were kicked out of the courtroom immediately. So we were really outside of the process while we were raising these children, day after day, month after month, and then later year after year. We were the only parents they had 24/7. So despite all that, we started to learn how to engage with the process that you can actually make a difference. So throughout all this, the question is, how did we end up here? Came a lot. How did we, a gay couple, end up in an institution which is really, you know, pretty much designed and run for and by straight people, right? So
Yeah.
how I would say there's a very small chance that a child of a gay parent will end up in the system. So it's not really designed by us or for us. And so that also made me question a lot of things that were happening. I was in a way queering the process where things are sort of taken for granted, but I was like, well, why should they really be this way? So this was one, why we ended up here. And now they ended up here was because of where we came from. Both Jonathan and I actually come from pretty humble backgrounds. Jonathan was ninth out of 10 children, in a rural African American family, raised on a farm. So he grew up with not very much. Okay, and he was the first in his family to go to college, and he pretty much built himself up to being where he is. And he's still working as a as an executive in a corporate world, put it this way. And my story is that I came here with my family. We were a Jewish refugee family that fled the Soviet Union. And so I came to this country with two suitcases and $100. And so basically from that, on to college and things like that. I mean, I also started pretty much at the bottom of the society. So we built ourselves into into who we became. And then So many years later, we end up dealing with very impoverished, and I would say disempowered part of the society that we really weren't in contact with. This was in some ways, it was kind of like it was kind of like it was coming into contact in some ways, conflict in terms of class. That's something people usually don't talk about, but I kind of touch upon it in the book that how did we, with like our lifestyle and our income and our life basically end up in a court in a room, for example, with social workers who are talking about all kinds of difficult things that the birth mother is going through and with to which we really do not relate. And I'm just being honest about it. So this was another how do I end up here? How did I end up hiding behind a car in a very poor neighborhood while I'm bringing the baby to the visit with her birth father? Because I'm kind of afraid because the birth father is very volatile and he's got all kinds of histories. So how did I end up behind the car? So there are a lot of questions about and then in the end you can see that you can see how our beliefs, our life trajectories kind of brought us to the places and the situations we've found ourselves in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about your support network through this process
Right.
because as you've mentioned, this was incredibly difficult for both of you. But you had support from a number of different people, a number of different areas. So how did you find that? Did you seek it out or did it find you?
It sort of came naturally and from, I would say, somewhat unexpected places. And I think it's as I sort of as I advise prospective adoptive parents, who are going through the process, like one of the takeaways from our story is that you really need that network. You need some emotional support, but you also need some practical support. It was with us, it was only the two of us. It was Jonathan and I, and we both work full time. We didn't have much of the family living near us. John's parents passed away. My parents were in the Bay Area, and we're in Long Beach, which is right by Los Angeles. So we're like in a different part of the state altogether. So just the two of us, figuring out how to be parents to two very small children. So with that, we first, even before we adopted, we joined a gay dad organization. It's called the Popluck Club, which is quite active in Los Angeles, where we met other dads like us. But also the club was very, very active in the politics at the time because our story is this it happened during the rise of of our community movement for full recognition, for full equal rights. We're talking about early through mid 2000s, right? So 2000 to 2004 to 2008. So we're very much involved in that on one hand as parents, on the other hand as just, LGBTQ individuals. But anyway, that aside, the support came from other parents with children of similar ages. Some of them were gay, most of them were straight, and we just kind of we were just helping each other, and that was very helpful, mostly in our neighborhood, but also beyond the neighborhood as well.
In writing this book and doing your research, can you tell, based on your experience, has the process changed either for the better or for the worse from when you were going through it?
The process, I would say the process hasn't changed much.
Mhm.
It's essentially the same process because it's guided by the same laws and beliefs. I would say in some ways it got more biased towards the birth parents, even if it was at the beginning, I mean, not at the beginning, at the time we were going through it, which was basically the ideal of children reunified with their natural parents was really kind of overarching concern in the whole case. Even though it becomes, I hope, becomes very clear at the very beginning of the book, the birth parents what we're talking about were not really prepared to deal with being parents. They really needed to figure out how to take care of themselves. But so in that sense, we have some new laws which are offering even more resources and support to the birth families, now to some degree at the cost of group homes. We see the results of that here in Los Angeles, where the county is so desperate for group homes that it's placing kids in hotels now. That's a whole other area to talk about. It's really not for me to talk about because our process ended years ago. But overall, no, it hasn't changed. What's changed is that unlike the 2000s, when we were the first wave of LGBTQ parents entering the process, we were in the first wave of out gay families where the children were not the product of previous, straight marriages or straight relationships. We were going into it specifically to have children as our children so in that sense, yes, now, as a gay man, you can generally adopt a child from a foster system in all 50 states, which was not a given at the time.
Mm-hmm.
There are, however, again, we see some reversal of that as well. There was a court case in which we participated, which went all the way to the Supreme Court, in which a foster adoption agency refused to place children even if they were qualified in other respects, gay and lesbian parents. And that went all the way to the Supreme Court. It's so-called it's the Fulton v. Philadelphia case. And the Supreme Court sided with that agency, saying that the agency can, based on its religious beliefs, choose not to serve our type of people. So in some ways, things are kind of going backwards a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't really compare it to the way things were, I would say, in 2004, 2005, where very few states would actually place children with LGBTQ parents. And in some states, you would lose even if you fully adopted, you would lose your parenting rights when you cross the state line. So things like that are gone, thank God. But there's still work that needs to be done.
Yeah.
So I want to make it clear that the conflict that drives the book was not between us and the birth parents. It was between themselves, their personal limitations and the system. We did not take the children away from the birth parents. They lost their children to the system, and the system had to take care of their children because they couldn't take care of the children themselves. We were the what's called the concurrent planning. We were the secondary track in case the children don't go back from our home to their birth parents. And only once the reunification services for the parents were terminated by the judge, and then later their parental rights were terminated, only then we were invited to come to the courthouse. But to get there, it took years.
Right. Right.
Because I don't want people to say, like, we're like stealing, we're vultures. And I'm like, no, we were like, of course, the more they live with us, the more they became part of our family and part of us, of course. But it was never anything directly between them and us. We were the alternative in case things don't work out with them, and things did not work out with them. But we were not the ones making those decisions. It was the state, it was the county, it was the judges. At the time when we were going through the process, I felt a whole range of emotions towards birth parents, especially towards the mother. But the further we got into it, and especially after the whole process ended, like all I really feel for her is just a lot of sorrow. I mean, it's really, it's really. I hope the reader will get that too. That much as they sympathize with the children, they should also sympathize with the mother for everything she went through and for everything that she really couldn't become. And so I just feel very, very deeply sorry for her. Less so for the birth father because of the reasons that are pretty clear in the book. But for her, being a teenager and not having a family and being as traumatized as she was, it's just terrible. It's just terrible. I tried to talk to my kids about, you should honor her. She couldn't take care of you. She couldn't raise you. That was very clear from the very beginning. But she shouldn't have had to be in a situation where she had to make those choices that she made.
Right. Right.
You know?
Well, you mentioned that it took you, I think, 4 years to open that box with all the paperwork, emails,
Yes.
and diaries in there. When you finally went back through and read through it and looked through it, did you find that, besides being probably acutely painful to do, did you find that your memory held, that you remembered things accurately and that your memories were in line with those of others? Or was it a case of sort of that thing that we all succumb to, where sometimes with the passage of times things look a little better, or we forget some of the harsher details?
Right, or we block them out because it's too painful to think about, right?
Uh-huh.
Um, what happened is that I was surprised by how much I actually forgot.
Mm.
And it was good to have those diaries, and it was good to look at the real documents and to be able to recall that. Oh, I should also mention that I shot a lot of whole movies at the time. So some of the scenes in the book, I'm actually transcribing what I see on the screen. Just
Well, that's
I'll just
handy. That was good thinking.
yeah. So it's like, yeah, it's, yeah. So some of it is, is diaries, videos. What I found, which was more of a discovery, not that my memory didn't hold all the, all the minutia, was that I was not the same person. So the Lane that lived through the events and was documenting them in his diary at the time, which was very raw and sort of processing things as they were happening, was not the Lane, years later, who was not living through a very, traumatic situation in his life, but also a little bit older, a little bit wiser, and also, my own belief systems, changed somewhat too. So it was I sort of writing this book was a very interesting process for me that I was it was a challenge because on one hand I'm trying to bring the reader into living through those situations, but at the same time I'm not the person that I was at that time. So it was kind of like writing in a dialogue, the Lane the writer and Lane the experiencer of the events. That's what it was like, and it was interesting. I mean, I actually wrote about that, and ironically, this I wrote a book chapter for a book on the studies of memoirs, which was exactly about that, and ironically, that chapter got published before the book.
Well,
I
and
found-
yeah, and that's an important point that I think people who write memoirs tend to experience, and don't necessarily realize they're going to do that as they undertake the process, right? They end up writing about somebody who, at different points along that process, is a stranger to them, is a stranger to the person writing the memoir.
Right. And another thing I wanted to point out about writing a memoir is when I speak about the memoir today, I compare it to not to painting, trying to depict the details, but more like sculpture, where your life is like a kind of the slab of marble, and then you're cutting within that. You find who exactly, what exactly you want to cut out of it. Except I'm really limited. I'm not inventing the events,
Hmm.
because events are what they were, but I'm trying to cut them out. And the question is, what do I leave aside? Because there was so much more that happened during those years besides parenting. Just to give you an idea, I went back to graduate school, and I was graduating at the same time as we were as the first chapter of this book is happening. Matter of fact. And shortly thereafter, I went through the career change from doing what I was doing before to starting to teach, English and linguistics. So I mentioned those things, but more like as a very small sort of background story, which was, of course, not just the background at the time, and there were other things happening too. So as I was editing a much larger manuscript down to what ended up being the book. I was cutting away the parts which I thought were not relevant or as relevant to the story, specifically the story of the foster adoption that we went through.
I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to ask, does the book have a happy ending?
Well, I think I already gave it away at the beginning, saying that we did finalize our adoptions. At the time when we finalized them, this was before we had family equality, and so we in the eyes of the federal government, we were two single individuals because we couldn't get married who adopted two sisters somehow. And I'll tell you one story, which is towards the end of the book, but I just had a very strange sort of a like it kind of came back again, literally several weeks ago. I had to take my older daughter to the Social Security office, because she needs to replace her Social Security card. And so we go into the office and we get called up, and I was like, wait a minute, I've been here before. And then I realized this is the very same Social Security office where I applied for her Social Security card
Mm.
once adoption went through. And that would have been around 2007, 2008. And we got called up to exactly the same counter that we were at, where I was at. She wasn't there. Well, I think it was just me filing for her card. And when we got called up, the person behind the counter asked her to give him her Social Security number, which she did, and then she asked her to give her the names of her parents. And I interjected saying that, excuse me, on her Social Security card, you'll see a mother and a father, but the fact that she has two dads. And she said, "Are you Alex Lane Igoudin, the mother?" I said, "Yes, I am Alex Lane Igoudin, the mother." So, because at the time, this was just part of sort of like everyday reality where
Right.
you are, yeah. I was given a choice: either do not state the mother, or one of you will have to be the mother. Because we can't have just two parents. It has to be a mother and a father, or just the father, one of you. And so I said, I'll be the mother because believe me, I've tried to be the mother for all these years already. So just write me in as a mother. Yeah. So our adoptions were successful. We prevailed, but it was, as you read the book, you'll see that it was never a given. And our kids are doing great. Our
Yeah.
kids are doing great. Our older daughter graduated high school. She's working. We're supporting her, but she's living on her own now, independently near us. We actually just saw her last week. And our younger daughter is choosing between four UC campuses because she got accepted into four UCs, and we're going to an open house this weekend on one of the campuses so she can see if that's the one that she wants to go to.
Very nice. Very nice.
She's
Well,
a high school senior.
yeah. Well, congratulations to both of them and to both of you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, if people want to learn more about you and the book, new releases, things that you have going on, where can they go to find you and that information?
Well, they can certainly check out my website, which is laneigoudin.com. That's LANEIGOUDIN.com. Or they can look me up on Facebook and Instagram and connect that way.
Very good. And if people want to purchase a copy of A Family Maybe, where can they go to buy it?
They can get it directly from my website and I can sign it for them. I thought, well, if I can ship it, might as well I can sign it too.
Right, right.
Or they can also purchase it on Amazon, Bookshop. They can you get it on Bookshop. They can get it from Barnes and Noble. I mean, it's available. The book is published by Trade Press, which is affiliated with Portland State University. So they distribute like any regular book would be distributed.
Well, Lane, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast, and I want to wish you luck with A Family Maybe. So congratulations on everything you've accomplished so far, and best of luck with the rest of your writing journey.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and it was such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
The Bookshop at the End of the Internet is a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like any good bookshop, this podcast features a wide variety of books by the equally varied and interesting authors who felt compelled to write them. This podcast gives you a chance to meet these wonderful writers and discover your next must-read book. Listen to the authors describe their books and tell you their stories in their own words. My interviews feature books from all genres and authors from all walks of life, including those who are indie published as well as those published by small presses and large publishing houses. Looking for unique, not so easy to find books for yourself, a friend, or a book club? Tune into this podcast and find your newest favorite author or maybe a soon-to-be bestseller. This podcast, like all the best bookshops, is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. Tune in, browse around, Find a new author and discover a new favorite book. You never know what treasures you might find in the bookshop at the end of the internet.